While fishing on the peaceful waters of the Lumber River, fishermen heard the distinct sound of a woman crying before the unmistakable pop of a gunshot. The commotion was seriously concerning, and soon enough they would find the body of 33-year-old Mica Miller. She had died from a single gunshot wound to the head. In the hours, days, and even weeks after her death, Mica's tumultuous story unraveled in front of the public's eyes, placing severe questions over her husband, John Paul. But the question is, was he responsible? Today, we're diving into the scandalous marriage of a pastor and his distraught wife. One that includes infidelity, abuse, stalking, deception, and even a vapid attempt at so-called resurrection. Welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime, folks. My name is Adrian, and today we're traveling to South Carolina to look at a recent and very conflicting case. With an ever-evolving story, Mica Miller's case is subject to change in the future, but in this video we will look at the truth, the influential factors behind her death, and what happens next. Feel free to subscribe if you'd like to, but more importantly, grab yourself a coffee and let's caffeinate while we investigate. This is the case of Mica Miller. Hey there folks. Today, we're traveling to South Carolina to visit Myrtle Beach. Myrtle Beach is a popular tourist destination for many good reasons. With fabulous food and stunning beaches, people travel from all over the East Coast to enjoy the sun, food, and fairs in town. It's also home to the Grand Strand, a remarkable 60-mile stretch of well-kept beaches. Housing multiple boardwalks, amusement attractions, restaurants, bars, and live music venues, this really does sound like my kind of weekend. And so, at least to me, it is no wonder that the beach is visited by over 20 million tourists every single year. Alongside the Grand Strand, Myrtle Beach State Park offers ample opportunities for camping, hiking, biking, fishing, and swimming. But don't be fooled here, because this place is not only a tourist destination. The Myrtle Beach metropolitan area is one of the fastest growing in the United States. And as of the year 2023, it had a population of nearly 400,000 people, representing a growth of 28% in the last 10 years. However, what residents of the town did not expect to deal with was a rather mysterious death which took place in the spring of 2024. And with a case so full of twists and turns, even people who knew the victim could not wrap their heads around what happened. On April 27, 2024, 55-year-old Johnny Jacobs was fishing in his usual spot at Lumber River State Park. It was just past midday when he heard cries from what sounded like a woman in the tree line nearby. Unfortunately, from his position in his boat, he could not see the individual. It was difficult to pinpoint precisely where this crying was coming from. But although the sound was rather faint, it was absolutely unmistakable. A woman was somewhere in the woods, and she sounded completely distraught. A few minutes passed by, when suddenly the crying stopped and the soundscape in the state park returned to normal. A light breeze could be heard through the trees. Birds were chirping, and the soft sound of water was flowing through the river. Things were peaceful again. But that's when, out of nowhere, the harsh pop of a gunshot rang out. Checking with the other boaters nearby, they all agreed that the sound was undoubtedly from a firearm. Motoring over to where he thought he had heard the sound come from, that is where he discovered a backpack on the bank of the river. As he opened the backpack, he made a chilling discovery. Right there, in plain sight, were the belongings of 30-year-old Mica Miller. Johnny had found her glasses, cell phone, keys, bank cards, driving license, and a small Bible stowed away in the side pocket. Within minutes, emergency responders arrived at the scene to investigate, searching by air, on foot, and in the waters for a potential body. And then, at 4:30 p.m., around an hour and a half after Johnny heard the gunshot, a woman's body was found in the river by kayakers. It was later confirmed that the owner of the belongings found by Johnny Jacobs was indeed the same woman found floating face down in the Lumber River. It was Mica, and the cause of her death was clear. A single gunshot wound to the head. Word spread around town rather quickly, and let me tell you, locals were baffled by the news. Mica was known as the local pastor's wife, and allegedly the two had a very healthy relationship together. She was also known to be deeply rooted into her faith, and was a very friendly and happy person. However, what many didn't realize was that below the surface of what seemed like a picturesque marriage built upon the house of God was a whirlwind of an abusive relationship. So you're probably wondering by now, who is this pastor? Well, let's take a look at the relationship between Mica and her husband, John Paul Miller. John Paul Miller was the pastor of Solid Rock Church and was well known to deliver powerful sermons. Meanwhile, his wife was often seen leading through song and worship. Now, before her untimely death, many of those on the outside looked at the two and saw a beautiful couple. However, those who knew them more closely and intimately saw many worrying clues. People who knew Mica always talked about her good spirit and her goodwill. She was caring, friendly, devout, and extraordinarily beautiful. To match her personality, she had big friendly eyes and a bright smile, and she was a talented singer who could connect with anyone she encountered. Now, Mica was also involved with the youth program, and her aim was to develop it to provide a safe space for the kids in the Myrtle Beach community. What some of the congregation didn't know, however, was that the very couple the church relied on for service were actually dealing with severe marital issues behind closed doors. Beginning in October of 2023, Mica filed for divorce against her husband, claiming that not only had he cheated on her multiple times, but he was also emotionally, mentally, and even physically abusive towards her. And whenever she pushed back against her husband's behavior, Mica claimed that he would threaten to lock her out of the home, forbid her from seeing her family, and even talk about her personal issues within the church congregation. But October of 2023 was not actually the first time that she'd tried to leave him. Back in January of the same year, it was clear that their relationship was pushing her to the brink. Packing her bags, Mica decided to move back to Kansas to live with her family. Initially, it seemed that she had made the best decision of her life. She quickly joined a new church, began building new friendships, started volunteering, and was doing her part to be present within her local community. However, after living in Kansas for only a few months, she abruptly left her family, leaving only a cryptic note behind and sending a few goodbye texts in her shadow. Her friend, Shaylin French, recalled the rather strange message she received, highlighting how it seemed entirely out of character for Mica. The message read, "Hey, good news. I've been reconciled and my husband is allowing me to come back home. Praise God." Now, what baffled Mica's friends and family was that she had already been developing plans to stay in the state long term. She'd arranged trips with the church, had a calendar full of activities, and had even scheduled work for the future. It just didn't seem like she was ready to return to her former home. While the exact motivations for Mica's return to Myrtle Beach still remain unclear to this day, it is evident that their relationship dynamic seemed to pick right up from where it left off once she returned to him. In multiple social media posts, Mica began to speak vaguely about domestic abuse, which many have interpreted as statements describing her own experiences. She would also discuss the difficulties of dangerous or unhealthy relationships. And as you watch her videos, it becomes abundantly clear that she was not just talking about general situations. Instead, she was describing her very own marriage.
You are the bride of Christ. And my Bible says that he took all the abuse you could think of for you, so you don't have to stay in an abusive relationship. Whether that's sexual, whether that's somebody forcing you to take illegal drugs, or alcohol abuse, or physical abuse, psychological abuse, making you think that this is all your fault, or you're a bad mom, or you're a bad wife, or you're a bad husband, or you're not giving it your all when you know you are. God hates divorce. But why? According to everybody I've asked and the scriptures that I've found, it's because it hurts people. But does abuse hurt people? How do you think God feels about that?
Now, to add to all of this, in February of 2024, Mica was admitted to a mental health facility for treatment, and, rather conveniently, in the days following her admittance, all of her divorce papers were withdrawn. From the outside looking in, many people saw this divorce as a rather good thing, because the stress caused by the marriage seemed to be doing a number on her mental health. However, what nobody knew at the time was that her admission was actually involuntary, and that her husband had orchestrated the entire thing. To make things even worse, while inside the facility, her husband would actually take most of her possessions out of the house and put it into storage. To add to this, it is also known that just before her admission, Mica was actually gathering all sorts of evidence and documentation to help support her filing for divorce. And so, the idea of her suddenly U-turning seems a little fishy if you ask me. And that wasn't the end of it either. In fact, while she was in hospital, all of the files from her computer and phone were wiped without a trace. So, what precisely was John Paul hiding? By the time Mica returned home, she could no longer access her iCloud, email, or Facebook accounts due to multiple password changes. John Paul would also take control of her vehicle while she was in treatment, claiming that, due to her mental health, access to a car was a risk to her life. As a result, Mica went to the police to claim that it had been stolen. When questioned about it, John Paul claimed that she would often recklessly spend her and his money. He also told the officers that he was worried that, should she regain access to the car, she would then sell it to fund a massive shopping spree. Now, with the car being shared property due to their marriage, no charges could be applied against John Paul, and so ultimately the matter was dropped without any repercussions. No surprise, but it only took a few weeks after returning from the treatment facility for Mica to leave John Paul once again. She left the home to move in with her sister, who already lived nearby, while the married couple, quote, worked through things. To Mica, any distance between her and her husband was desperately welcome. However, on the other hand, John Paul himself was seething. Losing control of Mica did not sit well with him, and shortly after her departure, he began to send her violent text messages. He even allegedly stayed outside of Mica's sister's home with a loaded gun, threatening that he would stay there until she came home with him. And of course, this prompted Mica's sister to call 911.
He said he's texting her threatening that he's going to kill himself.
Yeah, he said my blood is going to be on your hands. But prior to that, he was threatening to come in here, and he said, call the cops, I don't care, I'm armed and ready.
While no one knows what prompted Mica to return home, we can only imagine the pressure that she must have felt. Caught between her family that loved her and her abusive husband, she clearly lost her rational sense of direction, especially during those times when he was outside waiting for her with a loaded weapon. Now, all of this was enough already, but while their relationship continued to deteriorate, Mica had the uncanny feeling that she was being watched or tracked. It was in March of 2024, twice within the same week, that her tires were mysteriously slashed by an unknown individual. And when taken to the Honda dealership for repairs, the working mechanic presented her with even more disturbing news. In the hole of the slashed tire, tucked away as to avoid detection, a GPS tracking device was found. Mica had no idea what to make of this. I mean, sure, her husband seemed to be crazy, controlling, and a total fool, but he had never stooped to a level this low before. Sadly, the stalking did not stop there. At around 11:30 AM that very same morning, Mica was at the dealership getting her tires fixed when, according to a police report, an individual she'd been trying to avoid suddenly approached her. As a matter of defense, Mica pulled her phone out to record the incident, but by the time she started recording, the man had sped away in fear of being filmed and caught.
Walk away.
I'll show you the pictures.
Do you want to go to jail?
They'll be on Facebook in a few hours.
Alrighty, you'll be in jail in a few hours. Walk away.
In addition to this, Mica also believed that other individuals had been hired to follow her. She also told the police that she feared for her life and requested a restraining order on anyone who was stalking her. To shed light on the other side of the coin, there are some people that believe that Mica's paranoia was unjustified, and that, in fact, it was just a symptom of her ongoing mental health struggles. However, this is subject to debate, and depending on who you listen to, because all of Mica's family say that she was a very mentally strong person. There are other people, most notably John Paul himself, that claim that not only was Mica unstable, but unreliable too. He further claimed that she had schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and dependent personality disorder. So, if this really were the case, with so much pain and problematic behavior, why did John Paul stay in the marriage? The short answer is that he loved her. He also claims that while on her medication, she was a very sweet and reliable person. However, he also argues that she often refused to take that medication because it caused weight gain and her to slur words. So, what about the tracking device then? Well, John Paul claims that it was merely for her safety and absolutely nothing else. I mean, look, it does not take a rocket scientist to see that, even if John Paul's intentions were pure, he was dealing with her mental health in a terrible way. And sadly, it wouldn't end there. The onslaught of harassment continued into the springtime, when John Paul posted a topless photo of his wife on Facebook. And although Mica went to the police to press charges, they claimed it was impossible to determine who made the post. So ultimately, no action was taken. By now, Mica was desperately seeking help from the police. In her mind, if she did not submit to her husband, then he would become violent towards her. Oh, and we haven't even covered how she met him in the first place. The ugly truth is that John Paul had allegedly groomed her from a very young age, dating back to when he met her in the church's youth group in the year 2010. At the time, Mica was only 14 years old. John Paul, on the other hand, was 28. Now, before getting together several years later, the two were already in separate marriages. The affair between Mica and John Paul led to both marriages failing, and then a new one was created in their aftermath. Anyway, going back to our current timeline, not even 1 week after her recent visit to the police, Mica found yet another tracking device on her car, and this time she was sure that it was her husband. Enough is enough, she said, and Mica filed for divorce the following day. April the 27th, 2024. It was a Saturday, and like every other spring day in Myrtle Beach. However, what was about to happen 30 miles north in a state park would soon shake the community to its core. It was on that day that Robinson County Police were called to investigate a 911 call which was placed at Lumber River State Park in North Carolina, around an hour and a half northwest of Myrtle Beach. It was not uncommon to see people enjoying the plethora of camping sites, hiking trails, and swimming places. Some even enjoyed cookouts and paddling around in canoes and kayaks. But on that day, the police were not responding to your average disturbance, swimming incident, or hiking injury. Instead, they were there to recover or rescue a woman who, as she described on the 911 call, was about to take her own life.
Robinson County 911, what's the address of your emergency?
Hi, are you able to trace the location of my phone?
You don't know where you're at?
In National Park.
What's the phone number you're calling me from? Where's the park located at?
In Bear Bluff. I have my location on, I think, on my phone. Find My Phone is on. I just did my location.
Okay, I'm showing, I don't think you are in Robinson County. Are you at the Lumber River State Park?
Yeah, that's where I am.
Tell me what's happened.
I'm about to kill myself, and I just want my family to know where to find me.
By the time local law enforcement arrived, it was already too late. Mica was dead. In the immediate aftermath of this story, many believed that this was murder, especially her family and friends. They all claimed that, despite her terrible marriage, she was excited about the future. There were lots of things planned too, including hair appointments the following week, church service trips the following month, and even a trip to Africa with some of her luggage already shipped. So for her to take her own life seemed absolutely not plausible. And now add John Paul and the abusive marriage to the mix, and things were looking very, very suspicious. So, did he do it? Before we discuss who is at fault here, let's first take a look at what precisely happened, because these articles of evidence may actually sway your opinion. In the early afternoon of Saturday, the 27th of April, Mica can be seen leaving her apartment complex via her Ring camera. Soon after, a surveillance camera spotted her purchasing a gun at a nearby pawn shop. At 12:34 p.m, traffic cameras captured Mica traveling in her black Honda Accord along the highway, then stopping to top up her gas tank and buy a drink inside the convenience store. Leaving the station, she then began her journey towards North Carolina. Mica arrived at Lumber River State park at 2:54 p.m. That is when a 911 operator received a phone call from her. Within this call, she claimed that she was about to take her own life and wanted to make sure that her family could locate her body. 20 minutes later, responding officers arrived at the state park and searched for Mica, and sadly, shortly after, they were approached by a man in fishing gear who claimed to have heard crying coming from the riverbank, followed by a gunshot. He also took them to her backpack, which had all of her belongings inside. At 4:23 p.m., a local kayaker in the area called 911 to report a dead body floating in the river. Police established a perimeter, and by 6 p.m, an entire forensic team had arrived to take photos, gather evidence, and attempt to piece together precisely what could have happened. The black Honda Accord that Mica had driven from Myrtle Beach was found in the parking lot. There, police discovered a Sig Sauer gun case with ammunition in the passenger seat of the vehicle, alongside a copy of the receipt, clearly stating that Mica had purchased the weapon. Later on that day, they would recover a 9mm handgun in the water that matched the serial number of the gun brought only hours before her death. Both records and the store surveillance camera confirmed the buyer was in fact Mica Miller herself. On Monday, the 6th of May, the chief medical examiner released Mica's official cause of death as suicide by self-inflicted gunshot wound. At this point, the entire Myrtle Beach community was aware of the tragedy that had taken place. Many who knew Mica were outraged when the official cause of death was released. To them, there was much more at play here, and many believed it to be the work of her husband. Now, you would expect John Paul to be completely distraught by the news. His beautiful wife, a pillar of the community that they had built together, was now dead. I mean, who wouldn't be swallowed by the dark seas of grief? Well, alarmingly, in reality, the man actually barely seemed fazed. In the days following her death, he took the stand at Solid Rock Church to address his congregation and officially break the news. And yeah, I get it, grief does affect all of us differently, but the manner in which he spoke about his dead wife was honestly incredibly shocking.
As Christians, of course, we know she's not here and in heaven, and she's, worshiping and enjoying, and I hadn't even had time to look down here yet. But I got this lay next to her body and spent time with her body about 4 times this week, and each time it still didn't hit me. I thought she was going to wake up. I even tried to raise her from the dead one time this week, and that morning actually I went to the mall later. She had bought me this dog tag, and the chain broke, so I went to the mall to get it fixed. And I saw a female about 20-30 feet in front of me, and she was wearing one of Mica's dresses, and she had the same tattoo Mica has on her arm and the exact same hair. And out of just instinct, I screamed, "Mica!" And the girl turned around, and it was one of her sisters. And I thought I raised her from the dead. She's alive, But I can't wait to see her again one day.
No surprise, but people across the world who saw this video began to think how strange his demeanor and body language appeared. As someone who was mourning their late wife, you would think that he would be quiet and respectful, but evidently that is not the way he came across.
We're not seeing any grief here. We're not seeing what are called adapters, the things that we use to comfort ourselves, to self-soothe ourselves, like wringing of the hands, those kind of things. He's got what's supposed to be tears happening. That's not happening. He has no tissues there with him. His nose isn't running. He's trying to pretend it is, but it isn't. These are all the classic cues of someone who is faking an emotion. And if you'll notice, if someone's really feeling an emotion, that's what the emotions fire those expressions onto your face, in other words, from your brain, from your limbic system. And those don't last on him. We don't see grief. And the little bit of grief there's a semi-sadness that we see in there is taken away by a smile. And the smile is more prevalent than his grief is, or than his sadness is. This is one of those things that shows so many things that are wrong with it. I'm actually going to use this in training, because these are all the classics right here, all of them.
What was even stranger was John Paul's behavior towards other women shortly after she had died. It seemed as if he had already completely forgotten about Mica. In fact, in a news report, one waitress details his overtly flirtatious behavior only days after Mica's passing.
A waitress in South Carolina shared this receipt with us from a customer she served on February 23rd. Look closely. You see, the customer was John Paul Miller, J.P. Miller, as he's been called. He left that waitress a huge tip, along with his phone number and a smiley face. This was just 2 months before his wife, Mica, filed for divorce. The waitress, who we're referring to only by her first name, Christiana, reached out to John Paul a few days later and had a casual text exchange with him. Afterward, though, she hit the brakes, she says, after some red flags surfaced about him. And then, last week, after Mica killed herself, Christiana reached out to him yet again, not revealing that she'd made the connection between him and his wife. And she was surprised at his response, to say the least. Christiana joins us now. Thanks so much for coming on the show. What did he say?
Well, I asked him if anything was new, and he more or less said, yes, lots new, LOL. I'll text later.
LOL? Laugh out loud?
With so much attention and controversy, this was the moment that many people started to dig into John Paul's and Mica's history. The details of their previous marriages became widespread knowledge, and it was at that moment that many people started to realize just how young Mica was when John Paul started grooming her. It also became evident that, while he was busy painting Mica as an unstable individual, he too had his own personal demons. In a Facebook post from the year 2015, one of John Paul's neighbors is seen recording him as he squirms on the ground outside of his home. John Paul appeared to be suffering either from a psychotic break or a drug-induced mania. Originally posted by Ty Longerbeam, the video itself is concerning enough. However, it is the caption that really turned heads. The video says, "I believe the saying goes, getting a taste of your own medicine, and I mean that quite literally. You have used and abused for way too long, only to get up on that pulpit and consistently discredit your victims by airing out intentionally degrading, inappropriate personal information. Doing that allows you to control the narrative. Now we have the death of your wife that you claim only took her life because of mental illness. The fact is, nobody was ever mentally ill until they met you. This video is only proof that you yourself have issues and you know what medication can do to someone. Imagine being in a vulnerable state like this and being met with control, manipulation, and shame." So, how did Mica's family handle the news of her death? Well, it was always obvious to them that this story had two sides. The side that John Paul was claiming to be true, and then Mica's side, which of course she could not tell. After her death, Mica's sister came forward to talk about the many stories that she had confided to her. Stories involving control, manipulation, obsession, and harassment. And on multiple occasions, Mica allegedly told her family, "If I ever end up with a bullet in my head, it was not me, it was John Paul." With all of this in mind, Mica's family strongly believed that foul play was involved. The Mica they knew would never end her own life, but John Paul is adamant that, while their marriage did have its struggles, his wife was a sick individual who, in the end, lost the fight to her own mental illness. And despite the investigations team ruling that her death was in fact self-inflicted, online sleuths and even the mainstream media are still convinced that he was involved. And that's because when emotions are heightened, particularly around an unsavory individual, all rationale and logic tend to take a back seat for many. It got to the point that, unfortunately, even the fisherman who heard Mica's cries was being attacked online. Which is a real shame because, honestly, this poor guy had nothing to do with her death.
Jacobs tells me he'd been fishing for several hours on April 27th at the Lumber River State Park when he heard a faint cry. He says 2 or 3 minutes later, he heard a gunshot.
I want this to stop as far as me. I don't want to make this all about me because I'm still thinking about Mica. I'm trying to respect her family. And I got total respect for them, and I am so sorry for what they're going through. I never thought my day would turn out like that.
The online community were not the only ones convinced that John Paul was at fault. That's because even the Myrtle Beach community began to turn on their beloved pastor. On numerous occasions, they protested outside of his church wearing purple and holding signs which read "Justice for Mica" and "Break the Silence, End Domestic Violence." Despite all of this pressure that he was facing, John Paul continued to claim he was innocent. He continued to attend dozens of interviews and would even speak with people on TikTok about his side of the story. Now, this is still ongoing, but as of July the 29th, 2024, John Paul and Mica's family have reached a settlement expecting to end litigation on all sides. And while the complete terms of the settlement have not yet been disclosed to the public, both attorneys for John Paul and the family said that the agreement would, quote, resolve disputes in probate and family court concerning John Paul Miller, his church, Solid Rock at Market Common, and the estate of Mica Miller. Despite the continued frustration from members of the Myrtle Beach community, people online, and members of Mica's family, the attorney representing her family stated, "We do not want the Francis family or anyone to be dragged through litigation for years. We want to put this behind us and move on to the next chapter that matters. And when we say that we've gotten justice for Mica as a result of this settlement, it is true."
Solid Rock Church pastor John Paul Miller and his late wife's family came to an agreement today to end all legal disputes.
Mica Miller died by suicide at Lumber River State Park on April 27, 2 days after she filed for divorce. News 13's Adriana Lawrence joins us live outside the courthouse in Conway. And Adriana, how did both sides come to this agreement?
Well, Trish, Edward, not only did they come to that agreement you spoke about, but the family decided to withdraw their request to become a special administrator over Mica's estate. They say this is justice for Mica. Both John Paul, Mica's family, and their lawyers met during a probate hearing today after John Paul filed a motion to have Mica's sister Sierra removed as special administrator. In about 20 minutes, both parties agreed to withdraw that request. Regina Ward, attorney for Mica's family, and Russell Long for John Paul say the families want to set their differences aside and honor Mica. Ward says the focus is now Mica's law to strengthen protections for victims of abuse across South Carolina.
Pray for those who curse you. Bless those who curse you. Speak well of those who are not speaking well over you, because it's all going to work out.
Unfortunately, the exact details behind Mica Miller's death still remain a mystery. In fact, we may never know precisely what happened. However, what is clear is that, while she was still alive, Mica was one of the sweetest, most caring, devout Christians in her community. And as for John Paul, well, I'll just let you come to your own conclusions there. So, what happens next? Unfortunately, it's not actually so clear, so what I'm gonna do is leave a pinned comment down below with rolling updates of this case. If you ever want to know what happened, just come back to this video in the future. Of course, the end of this story is slightly different to the usual, but nevertheless, I thought it was an extraordinarily interesting case. I guess it depends if you believe that someone has to pull the trigger for them to actually be responsible for someone's murder. Some may say that, metaphorically, he'd been pulling that trigger for many years prior. I guess it depends if you believe that someone has to physically pull that trigger to be responsible for someone's death. Some may argue that, metaphorically, he had been pulling that trigger for a few years prior. So, on that note, what are your thoughts about this story? Do you think that John Paul has any culpability whatsoever? Or do you think that this was all in Mica Miller's hands? As always, let me know what you think in the comments section down below. Just a quick note, but if you want to support me in the channel, please check out my Patreon here, or alternatively, check out my social media, most notably my Instagram. And I think that's pretty much the end of this video today, folks. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this case insightful. As always, I'll see you again very soon for another video. Until that moment arrives though, remember to look after yourself, look after each other, and of course, stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.